Hi there, Andre here from Peak Motorcycles. It's just before Christmas here in the UK and it's a thoroughly miserable day. I'm here at Virtu Motorrad in Rotherham because my 1250GS is in for a service. I could have picked a better day. I don't know if you can see what it's like outside behind me, but it's been absolutely pouring with rain. I got completely soaked coming here, but the bike needed servicing and it's been booked for a while, so I thought I'd come anyway. While it's in, there was a couple of, don't call them recalls now, a few updates done. I think there's a swing arm oil and something else that are being done. So I have a few hours to kill and I thought I'd take a test ride. Now, for those of you who saw my BSA Gold Star test ride and thought that going out in the snow meant I couldn't push the bike, this is going to be another one. It's about between 3 and 4 degrees outside. That's around, I guess, high 30s, maybe 40 Fahrenheit. Pouring with rain, which is why I'm doing this intro inside. And today I'm going to be riding BMW's middleweight adventure bike, the F850GS. So I'll give you a close-up look around the bike, give you a quick walk around. I won't do it too long because my camera isn't waterproof that I use for that. But then I'll get on, I'll go for a bit of a ride just for an hour or so. Try and see what it's like to ride it in miserable, wet English weather and let you know what I think. And hopefully by the time I come back, my 1250GS will be done and I can ride that home again in the rain, and then hopefully that's the last of these wet test rides for a while. So here it is. I'm not going to dwell too long on this just because it really is pouring with rain, but a few things I think worth pointing out. So I'd written the old 800 and it wasn't quite my thing. I know some people love them, but I don't know, I was too used to my 1200GS. So it definitely wasn't my thing. So a few things to point out in here. They all come with this 21-inch front wheel. It's quite a skinny front tyre. I think it's a 1990 profile, but with twin discs. And so it's definitely got that sort of off-road intention about it. Now the engine itself is 850cc parallel twin. I think the old one was an 800, or give or take a few cc's. This one's got a couple of counterbalance shafts. Powers up by 10 horsepower. I think it's 94 now instead of the 80 horsepower. It's supposed to be smoother, with more power and more torque, so that should be interesting to see. They've also changed the firing interval. So the old one I think was a 360-degree crank, so they were basically each one would fire with each revolution, and this is now on a 90-degree offset, so it fires at 270 degrees and 450 degrees. If that doesn't mean anything to you, well, that's fine, but I think if you ride it, you'll very much feel how that firing sequence differs as you rev the engine and the way in which it makes the power and the torque. It's got a single disc on the back. This one's actually got the one-piece seat. It's got the brackets up there for fitting a top box and luggage. Everything else actually seems to be pretty simple. It's got the cylinder for the electronic suspension there in that sort of little ZF pod. It is chain, not a shaft drive, which obviously I got used to on my GS over many years. I think this one does have a quick shifter. It does come with a centre stand under there. It doesn't have that sort of big windscreen that I get on my GS, so we'll see how that works today in the heavy rain. Other than that, it comes with heated grips as standard, electronic suspension, all the normal GS electronics. It doesn't have keyless ride. This one does have a conventional key. Otherwise, I think that's a pretty good looking bike. It doesn't look as imposing as the GS certainly, but then again, the GS looks massive, as I'm sure many people will agree, and they do an adventure version of this bike. It does have an adjustable screen, even though it's quite a stubby one, and it's LED headlights and everything all round. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start it up and give you a look. There we go. Very, very similar to exactly what I get on my GS when I start that up. In fact, it is exactly the same. So I think that's enough of that. You can see the temperature is headed up to the heady heights of 6 degrees now. It's 1:45 in the afternoon, so we've gone past high noon. So I'm going to get on the bike, go for a bit of a ride, tell you what I think. Right, so here we go. This is my first startup on the F850GS. I see this already. It has a little 3 by the heated grips thing, which is nice. It has 3 settings. That's actually really, really smooth. There's none of the vibration that you got on the old 800. One thing that does trouble me a bit is this screen. I thought maybe I can put that on its high setting, and then I realised that actually that is the high setting. So yeah, there's really not a lot of wind protection there, but then again, in hot sunny weather that would be no problem at all. On days like this when it's 6 degrees here in the UK, we shall see what a difference that makes. Right then, let's go for a ride. So my very first thought, just riding out of the car park here at Virtu Motorcycles in Rotherham, is that it just feels really light, really proper light, compared to my GS, my 1250 GS, which is, well, it's a bit of a lump. Now, I think actually on paper, there isn't actually that much difference. I think this is 228 kilos, something like that. My GS, I think, is 250-ish. So 20 kilos isn't a huge amount, but this actually feels a lot lighter. It feels a lot smaller. Even though I suspect it actually isn't. I think the ergonomics must be fairly similar to what I have on my 1250. Certainly on touching the brakes, it doesn't have quite the same surety that I get from the 1250, but it's more than enough. It really is. It certainly feels like an easy bike to ride. I seem to have had a few of these lately where I've been out on test rides, and just when you get on a bike and just straight away it just feels very, very comfortable. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to ride out of Rotherham. There's a dual carriageway into Sheffield where I can see what it's like at speed. I'll have a quick run out into the Peak District, and then I'll head back to the dealers and give you my final thoughts. Hopefully that will give me a chance to ride it in all sorts of places, even if the conditions are just this horrible soaking wet weather, limited visibility. Really the sort of day when, if you had a choice, you would not be out on a motorbike. But then again, we can't always ride in lovely sunny weather, so as I was here, I might as well make the most of it. I'm riding along on this dual carriageway now, and one of the first things I've noticed is actually how much quicker it feels. And I look down, I'm only doing 48 miles an hour. I think some of that is just the lack of wind protection. It almost feels a bit like a naked bike, even with the screen in this upper position. But the bike is really, really super smooth. I mean, 90 horsepower is more than enough. You know, there's plenty of bikes of this weight that make significantly less. And yeah, it's a really easy ride, but I can feel the speed. Now, I'm sure that there's bigger screens available. I'm sure if you get the 850 Adventure, that probably helps quite a lot as well. But for just being out and on here, yeah, I probably should have picked a better day, but you know, in the UK, if we didn't ride when it rained, we wouldn't ride at all. So I'm riding now on the Sheffield Park Road. It's 3 lanes now. It's a new road surface, but you can see just how much water there is. It really is pretty miserable riding on here through the spray. And the bike's certainly comfortable enough. A few things I noticed. So first of all, I mentioned it's got these 3 settings for heated grips. I always felt on my GS the 2 settings were not quite hot enough and too hot. I can certainly say that on setting number 3 that this bike's currently set to, even wearing my big, heavy, thick Alpine Stars winter gloves, the grips feel too hot. Certainly the right one. The left one doesn't feel quite as hot. I don't know if that's just my hands, but certainly I think 3 is the new 2, so I'll just rock that down to 2. The next thing I think I should mention, and if you only watched the intro, someone's probably already commented, I think I said that this bike had a quick shifter. As I just found out, it definitely doesn't have a quick shifter. I'm sure that's an option just on this particular F850GS triple black, which is the standard one, not the Adventure. That this one doesn't have a quick shifter, so apologies for saying that earlier when I was doing my walk round. I think I was distracted by all the rain. 6th gear, about 3,000 RPM. Certainly feels it's got enough go. Bit of a throb, you can just open the throttle and off it goes. So I think as a cruiser, I think it's absolutely fine. You know, it's definitely more at that sort of middleweight, maybe do a bit more, slightly more off-road focused than the 1250 GS. But you know what, you could ride any of these bikes anywhere. They're all a little bit heavy to be out and out trail bikes, but if you wanted a tourer where you could cope with some rougher roads, I'm sure this would just perform admirably. I must admit, I think for a long journey that had a lot of sort of higher speed A roads, I think I still would pick my 1250 GS, but then again, for riding some dirt roads where this is maybe a long distance travel bike to more remote parts of the world, maybe this is more ideal. So I'm just queuing through some traffic to get into Sheffield city centre now. One thing I have noticed is that the throttle, I don't know if you can see that and how the bike's reacting there, but at low speeds and low gears it is a little bit jerky on the throttle. Now that might be the Euro 5 fueling that's doing that, but certainly okay, I know a lot of the time you're not going to be doing 15 miles an hour in 3rd gear, but if I show you what that's like, if I go into 3rd, it is, you know, as I come on and off it, and as I was slowing down, it was a lot more noticeable. It definitely feels like the fueling's not quite there. Now I know the Euro 5 has a requirement to be more efficient, that it shuts off the fuel, I think, under engine braking, which is a lot more noticeable than lower gears. Haven't really noticed it on another bike in 3rd in quite the same way as that before, but yeah, I'll keep an eye on that as I do the rest of the ride. So I've been riding the bike through traffic for a while now. A few things I noticed. So that sort of slightly snatchy throttle at low revs and low speeds is a little bit annoying, but I'm sure I get used to it. The clutch is light, the gearbox is light, that's nice. The bars feel quite narrow compared to my GS. I don't know if they actually are, because sometimes it's just how you sit makes you feel in a certain way, but as I sit on it, it does feel quite compact, and certainly for filtering through traffic it does feel like quite a small bike that can easily fit through, even though it isn't. One thing I wasn't sure of how it would behave was with this 21-inch front wheel, which is great for rolling over things, is generally at the expense of, you know, some of the tightness with the steering. And this bike certainly doesn't feel like that at all. It feels very sharp, and certainly for manoeuvring around cars in and out of traffic, it's very nimble indeed. Now maybe some of that is perception because of the little screen and you can see over the front of the bike. So I'm out of the city now. I'm heading out into the Peak District in the countryside. A few thoughts. First of all, this is a terrible day to go test riding. The weather is just getting worse and worse. It's dropped by 1 degree down to 5. I can now even see my own breath inside my helmet, which is annoying, and it's just very wet, very wet indeed. So trying to relate that back to the bike, what I would say is that if you're going to be riding through the winter or in these sorts of temperatures on a bike like this, then I think you're definitely going to need a bigger screen, because for me today this little screen, even on its highest setting, just isn't enough. I think if I was touring around Europe in the summer, I think it would be absolutely perfect, because you get lots and lots of airflow when you needed it in hot weather, but when it's cold there seems to be very little protection for you on the bike. Something that's easily fixed, but for me today in these conditions, it's the 23rd of December today, so we're past this very cold snap in the UK. I know the US is having some -40 temperatures at the moment. It seems to handle really well, you know. It's that front wheel, especially at sort of slightly quicker speeds. I've slowed down a bit now for the traffic because of the fog. We have fog as well, fog and rain. But yeah, it's at these sort of speeds, you know, the bike tips in really nicely. It doesn't feel like it's got that 21-inch front wheel. I'd ridden the Royal Enfield Himalayan and then my Scram back to back, and you really notice the difference there going from a 21-inch to a 19-inch front wheel. But the handling on this, even though it's got a 21-inch front wheel, actually seems spot on. The weather is getting worse, the cars are slowing down, everyone's doing 30 miles an hour now because of the visibility. So one question is, would I pick this as a middleweight adventure bike? And my answer is probably no. That's not because it's not a good bike. I think everything about it I really like, pretty much. Some of the fueling at low speeds is a little bit jerky, but I think a lot of Euro 5 bikes are like that. There's a lot of things on it which are a lot like my GS, so it'd be a very easy bike to switch from, and some things I'm sure could be easily replaced. I've ridden quite a few bikes in this category, and I think for me at the moment at least, even next to this, probably the Tiger 900 Rally Pro, which is very similar. You know, it's not that different a bike. It's got that 21-inch front wheel, it's got a very similar electronics package, it's also chain driven, and I think that's probably the best of all of them that I've ridden so far. This engine does seem to be brilliant. You know, it's the old one was a bit of a sort of throaty, lumpy twin. This feels a lot smoother, and just the sort of the throttle characteristic on it, if we just give it a bit like that, it's just got this this noise that builds in a really pleasing way. That sounds daft, and if you're listening to this and you're thinking, what on earth is he talking about? But honestly, if you get on one of these, you know, ride it even sort of accelerating from 3000 RPM upwards, oh that's a lot of water, from 3000 RPM upwards, and it's just a really nice growl. Hang on, I'll have another go. That's at 3,500, and off it goes. And then it becomes a real sort of throaty rasp around 6,000 revs, and then it builds from there. Not that I'm getting a chance to really play with that here on this road. I'm going to turn off shortly, so I'll talk a bit more about the suspension when I do that. So this is the bit where I'd normally do a little piece to camera at the side of the road and then give you a walk round and talk through a few bits on the bike. But honestly, it is so wet and miserable here that I'm not even going to take my helmet off. I'm not going to get my other camera out of the bag, but I will give you a quick walk round. The bike is getting a little bit mucky just because of the state of the roads. But so far, I'm really enjoying this BMW F850GS triple black. I think the triple black's just the colours. I guess that's the wheels, the bodywork, fuel tank. Doesn't have all the toys on it. There's a few things I'm missing that I guess I've been overly comforted by on my GS, things like the Hill Start Pro, which nobody needs, but it's quite nice when it's there. Also the quick shifter. Definitely needs a bigger windscreen if you're going to ride in conditions like this, because I'm certainly finding that I'm getting very little protection from the wind and the rain and the cold with it as it is. This one does come with a bash guard, which hopefully you can just see underneath there. And actually the fit and finish on the bike is what you'd expect from a BMW. Everything really is quite tidy. It does have a single seat. I'm not sure how comfortable that would be for a pillion, but I'm quite sure it's fine. This one comes with the Michelin Anarchy tyres on. These ones are pretty new. I've had them several times on my GS and they've always been great when they've been new. As they get older, particularly in the wet, I've become less and less enamoured with them, but for today in these conditions so far, no concerns at all. Right, I know that was just a very quick walk round, but it's a horrible day here, and you know what, you could probably go down to your local dealer and see one of these in the dry, so I'm going to head off. So just before I set off again, one thing I did notice is that it's got the 12-volt socket here on the left hand side of the dash, which if you had a BMW before, you might recognise that. I also noticed that this one actually has USB on the right hand side, which is great to see that finally filtering through. I think we'll all agree that USB has been out for a while now, and it's great to see that BMW are picking that up and including it on their bikes. I think that's what most of us use for charging most of our things these days. So this is the road that goes up to Burbage from Hathersage, and you might recognise it from some of my other videos. So I typically come up here to see how suspension fares, because the road looks fairly flat and smooth, but actually it's really bumpy. It's a lot of loose ground underneath it, and as a result you get all these dips and bumps all over. I hadn't really noticed anything with the suspension before now, and that's generally a good thing. And even coming up over here now, it really is very composed indeed. It's got the BMW ESA electronic suspension, which adjusts constantly and tweaks the rear shock based on what the front end is doing. And yeah, it feels very planted. You know, I'd expect nothing less, if I'm honest. I think it's something that BMW have been working on for many years now, and clearly they've made good inroads into it, and it is makes for a very good ride. So I mean, I can't see where I'm going a great deal, and I think I'm going to head back to the dealer now, because I don't really want to be out when it's like this and it's dark. But so far, yeah, I think it's been a really interesting bike to try, and I think what BMW have done with that engine really is great. So I'm coming to the end of my test ride now, and I think one thing we've all learned from today is never go and do a test ride in miserable weather. Having said that, if we only ever rode bikes in perfect weather, you'd never really know what it was like this. And while I've quite enjoyed going out on this bike, it's definitely not made for these conditions. And if you're buying an adventure bike like a GS in any of its forms, you might kind of expect that it's a little better at coping when it's like this. Having said that, today has been properly miserable. Everything other than the fact I've been out riding a bike, which I always enjoy. So I'm almost back at the dealer. When I get there, I think I'll just park it up outside. I'll go indoors, start making a big puddle on their floor, and I'll give you my final thoughts from inside, because frankly it is still just way too wet to be riding out here. So I'm back at Virtu Motorrad here in Rotherham. It's been absolutely soaking outside. Even the ducks wanted to borrow an umbrella. I did enjoy riding the F850GS. A few things about it I loved that extra setting on the heated grips that made my hands toasty and warm. I love the new engine. I think the F850 now is just so much smoother than the old 800 engine. Everything's laid out a lot like it is on my GS, but was missing some of the electronics. But at the price point, it makes perfect sense. It's very light, it's very easy to ride through traffic, even though I know it's not a particularly light bike. So all of those things I thought were brilliant. Also even the steering, you know, with that 21-inch front wheel, you might think it would be a little bit more unwieldy than it actually is, but I really didn't notice it while I was out. A few things that I wasn't quite so keen on. So one was that little screen in weather like this. Yeah, it's not enough protection from the elements. I think on a hot sunny day when you want as much ventilation as possible, it's perfect. But for today, yeah, the wrong screen for this sort of weather. And if you wanted to ride it year round in the UK, I think that would be a consideration. I found the riding position a bit more sitting on than sitting in, which might suit some people more, but for me, I prefer to be sitting in the bike a little bit more. Other than that, I thought it was really good. I mean, I think that as far as the middleweight bikes go, it's definitely up there as one of the top contenders. For me, perhaps not exactly the top one, but I think it's still a very good motorcycle. I'm sure many people will choose one, and you do see a fair few of them out on the road. So anyways, that's it. That's my quick video of the BMW F850GS. This was a 2023 triple black model. Hope that's been interesting and useful. If it has, maybe check out some of my other content, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. It's an absolutely horrible day though, absolutely pouring down. I probably should have just stayed in the dealership and I'd be drinking coffee right now instead of out riding in this. My hands are getting quite hot, so I put it back on setting number 3. What this does mean is, well, when I look at my hands, they're actually steaming off the grips. So it is that wet that my gloves got very wet indeed. But I don't know if you can see that coming off the left side, but there's just a lot of steam.